This is an objection a lot of times to Peterson, is that he's overanalyzing the Bible. And to me, it feels like if you're going to have a document that is this embedded into Western culture, that has been this important, that controls the lives of so many people, you should probably give it the benefit of the doubt when you're reading it, if you actually want to understand it. I think it's supremely intellectually arrogant.
To remember what kind of catastrophic past we emerged from and how much privation ruled the world prior to 1895, essentially. And certainly the farther back you go, the more bloody and horrible it was. I mean, how often do you think it was necessary, and this is not obviously something I'm in favor of, and this is also one of these situations where we get to play with ideas that we might not otherwise play with. How often do you think it was necessary for people in the past who had absolutely no access to birth control and who didn't have enough food to sacrifice a child for the survival of their family? I mean, God only knows, you know. And
that's a hell of a moment to ask to subscribe from Travis, who is the one who creates these clips. But yeah, that's a real harsh question. Let's see where we go with this.
But that's worth thinking about. It's like, you know, life is unbelievably cruel and difficult. And one of the problems that comes when you discover the future is that you might have to make the most painful of sacrifices. And lots of archaic people do this sort of thing. They do that with their elderly people. They do that with sick people. They do that with infants that they deem too fragile to survive. So part of child sacrifice, and I know the literature on child sacrifice reasonably well, part of child sacrifice seemed to emerge out of the observable necessity to leave someone behind so that everyone else didn't die. And we don't know how often that had to happen in the past.
And by the way, that is a little bit different from the type of child sacrifice that most people picture, which is kind of, you know, Aztecs ripping hearts out so the sun will rise tomorrow, to be a little bit generalizing. That's kind of different than, I suppose, Donner Party type moral dilemmas that apparently many people found themselves in. I'm curious where Peterson is driving with this. I have a suspicion, but let's let this unfold here.
It might have had to happen a lot.
Right.
Now, obviously...
Although, just in the interest of kind of conceptual clarity here, human sacrifice is a larger horror than that. So you have, what was very common is the sacrificing of, captives. So you take the Aztec sacrifices where you now have slaves, some of whom you're going to...
Yeah, the Aztecs sacrificed about 25,000 people a year. Look, I mean, it's clearly a bloody mess. There's no doubt about that. But, you know, one of the things that you see happening in the biblical narrative, which is extraordinarily interesting, is that...
Oh, okay. He's going to talk about the Abraham sacrifice. Well, it wasn't really a sacrifice because God actually stopped him. It's what actually happened. But... yeah, isn't it like miraculous that throughout all of human history that was a thing, and now it's just not almost anywhere, certainly not in the developed world? That's awesome. People take for granted the type of luxuries we have. I think it's due to a lack of understanding of what used to be and how easy it would be to be back there. So, hooray for no more ritual child sacrifice or necessity-driven child sacrifice. At least, almost none of it.
You see echoes of child sacrifice at the beginning, but what happens is the sacrificial notion gets increasingly psychologized as the story progresses. So, you know, you see that transition with Abraham and Isaac, where the child sacrifice is actually forbidden, although previously demanded by God. And then you also see it, as you already laid out, in the substitution of the circumcision for the idea of sacrifice itself.
Right.
And then what seems to happen? See, I'm trying to figure out how these ideas develop psychologically from their behavioral underpinnings, is that eventually it becomes psychologized completely. So you can say, well, we can conceptualize a sacrifice in the abstract, so my parents can sacrifice to send me to university without anything or anyone having to die. It transforms itself from something that's enacted out as a dramatic ritual into something that's a psychological reality. But all that blood and catastrophe along the way is part of the process by which the idea comes to emerge.
And by the way, what Peterson is saying is kind of the role that God takes in the story, right? Because initially, at the beginning, it is God commands Abraham to sacrifice Isaac as just kind of a necessity of the way of the world, because again, the way Peterson thinks about God, which again, you don't have to think about God this way, but God isn't like just a person with petty demands. He is a representation of reality in some sense. Jesus, I'm stealing his language. But that's that's because I'm trying to translate what Peterson means. If God is a representation of reality, and throughout most of history and in the story at the beginning, initially he asks Abraham to sacrifice his son, but then as he goes to do it, God says, actually, no, you don't actually have to kill him. You can perform necessary sacrifices in a different way, because it's no longer necessary to sacrifice in this particular way. The title of this video is Peterson Overthinking Child Sacrifice. I think that's, it's kind of an arbitrary, first of all, it's a title, so, we shouldn't read into it too much. But, this is an objection a lot of times to Peterson, is that he's overanalyzing the Bible. And to me, it feels like if you're going to have a document that is this embedded into Western culture, that has been this important, that controls the lives of so many people, you should probably give it the benefit of the doubt when you're reading it, if you actually want to understand it. I think it's supremely intellectually arrogant, and probably missing a lot of meaning if you don't try to, read into it a little bit. But, that's just me.
Right. But, so what is the connection of all of this? Because, yes, so there is this history, and I would argue we are busily trying to outgrow much of it, if not most of it, whether it's evolutionary history or just the cultural history.
We might be trying to transmute it so that it becomes, we can maintain, as you've suggested we do, we can maintain what's useful in the tradition and throw out everything that's pathological.
Yes, but we're constantly discovering a lack.
By the way, I agree with this standard. I think that we should keep what's good in tradition and get rid of what's bad or pathological. I think the difference between myself and Harris is that I have kind of higher standards if you're trying to prove something that is traditional is pathological. I have very high standards. I have a very high burden of proof there. But I think that's a good standard to have. I think it's a good standard. Obviously, keep what's good in tradition and throw out what's not. I think most people might even agree with that. The question is, what's your burden of proof? The question is, where's the burden of proof placed? And for me, the burden of proof is on the person who's trying to get rid of the old thing. Maybe that's old-fashioned. Tell me what your burden of proof is in the comments.
A fit between both what we perceive in ourselves as biological imperatives and the cultural legacies of just what mommy and daddy taught me was true, right? Which we have now every reason to believe might not be true. And we're trying to optimize our thoughts and institutions and relationships with one another for our current circumstance, and yet we have this legacy effect of certain books and certain ways of speaking have a completely different status, and they have this status because they may in fact, it's imagined, not be the products of merely previous human minds, but they may be the products of omniscience. And this is where
well, there's another reason here too. So that's definitely one of them, obviously. But the other reason why is because Harris slipped something in there. He said that we're in different circumstances. Now that's true, but I am also of the persuasion that there's some things about reality that are very stable besides physics, besides material science. I think there's things about the human condition. I believe that human nature actually exists. And while of course environment plays into it and can transmute it in multiple ways, at root humans are still human and we have a nature. And therefore there are things about reality there are things about humans' interaction with the material world that creates a stable reality that is not purely physical, that is strategic, that is pragmatic. And so I think that that's where you can argue for the strength of tradition, that it's the progress in finding out what pragmatic rules are best. So there's also that reason. Now, of course, people can be wrong about those pragmatic strategies, and that's where Harris's observation about the importance of the books being written by an omniscient being is absolutely relevant. But that's not all it is. It's also because it's not just because, this was written by an omniscient person, so it must be true. It's this stuff actually corresponds to something in reality. And if you bet your life on it, and if you live your life by these principles, things are more likely to work out for you than if you do anything else. And I think that's more of the faith than the faith in the supernatural. I think that kind of betting your life on a set of principles is also a very real type of faith that I think, certainly in my experience, is borne out. So yeah, it's not just about believing in the Sky Daddy. There's some of that, obviously, but that's not all that it's about. And people who tell you otherwise are being very reductive.
The respect accorded to religious tradition is totally unlike the respect we would accord to anything else. Mythology, literature, past science, past philosophy. I mean, people can read Plato and Aristotle for their entire lives without ever being fully captured by the kind of dogmatism that every religion demands that you be captured by if you're really going to be an adherent.
So that's
Why are you not investing in tax liens? No, seriously. Why are you not investing into one of
Aristotle?
So that's an interesting point. I would argue that I'm not really sure that that's true. I think that it's possible to be a member of a religion that has doubts. I had a conversation with Randall Rouser, who I disagree with on quite a bit, actually, but you wouldn't get that from the interview. But he talks about the Doubter's Creed, of being a Christian without really being super sure you believe in all the supernatural stuff. But you believe in a lot of the core moral principles. And I feel like that type of relationship with the religion is possible and is quite common, especially among people who are in the faith find themselves racked with doubts all the time. It's actually pretty normal from my experience. And that feels like a somewhat similar relationship to one might have with philosophy, how somebody might subscribe to Stoicism, how someone might bet their lives on the principles of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, and believe that Marcus Aurelius's observations weren't just his subjective opinion, but were a recognition of objective realities about the nature of the world. So I think that there's actually quite a bit of overlap between non-religious philosophies and religious philosophies or religion. Now, again, to give the devil his due, Harris is right that the supernatural aspect is demanded technically. However, there's actually a whole bunch of debate over this, but among theologians, and certainly not every adherent to religion believes the way that Harris says he believes. So, again, most of these reactions are me just complicating things a bit more than anything. So, hope you enjoyed it. See y'all next time. Bye-bye.